Veteran moves into a $500 haunted cabin. Days later, his dog unlocks a 50-year-old secret. The snow came sideways, slamming against the windshield like shards of glass. Jack Monroe gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles pale beneath the leather gloves. The sign for Pine Hollow, population 412, appeared through the storm before vanishing again into the white blur. Beside him, Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, his amber eyes fixed ahead. The old German shepherd barely moved, except for the twitch of his ears each time thunder cracked across the valley. There was something soldierly in his stillness, like he understood storms weren't always made of weather. Jack finally turned onto the unpaved road that led to the cabin he'd bought for $500. A joke, people in town had said. That place is haunted by bad luck. One man at the gas station had muttered. Jack hadn't cared. He wasn't afraid of ghosts. He'd already met worse things. In Fallujah, in hospitals, in his own head. When he reached the property line, the truck coughed once and died. Snow piled on the hood, melting into a hiss. Jack stepped out, boots sinking deep into the powder. The cabin stood in silence. Old pine, broken shutters, a roof sagging like a tired spine. Smoke stains stretched up from a stone chimney. Rex jumped out and circled the porch, sniffing. His tail was stiff, his hackles raised. "Easy, buddy," Jack murmured, unlocking the door. "It's just an old house." The hinges screamed as the door opened. A gust of cold air swept through, carrying a smell of damp wood, ash, and something metallic. Old blood or rust, Jack couldn't tell. The interior was dim, a single window half frozen shut. Dust floated in the air like slow snow. He dropped his duffel by the wall and crouched to start the fire. Rex didn't follow him to the hearth. Instead, the dog stood rigid in the middle of the room, staring at the stone fireplace. His ears pinned back, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Jack turned. "What's wrong?" Rex stepped forward, nose to the soot-stained stones. Then he began to scratch, slowly, deliberately, his claws clicking against rock. The sound echoed in the silence. "Hey, stop that," Jack said. But the dog wouldn't. His growl deepened, his body tense. Jack grabbed the collar and pulled him back, but that's when he heard it too, a faint sound from behind the stones. A hollow knock. He froze. The firelight flickered, throwing long shadows across the floorboards. He tapped the stone with a wrench. The same knock came back, soft but deliberate. He stared at the wall, breath fogging in the cold air. "That's impossible." Rex barked once, sharp, urgent. It wasn't fear, it was warning. Jack pressed his ear against the wall. For a moment, there was only the howl of wind outside. Then came 3 short knocks. Pause. 2 more. The rhythm of something alive. He stepped back fast, heart racing. "Someone's playing games," he muttered, but the nearest house was miles away. The fire crackled, casting orange light across the dusty room. Jack knelt again, brushed away the loose soot, and found an iron vent at the base of the fireplace. Its edges were fresh, recently moved or replaced. He gripped it and pulled. The vent gave way with a shriek of metal, revealing darkness behind it. A rush of cold air hit him from inside the wall, air that smelled like earth and rust. He shone his flashlight into the gap. A narrow void, maybe an old chimney flue. Something metallic glimmered deep inside. Rex growled louder. His fur stood up, his gaze fixed on the black hollow. Jack reached in, fingers brushing against something rough and sharp, a hinge, maybe, or a latch. When he pulled, a small piece of bone dropped out and landed on the floor. Not animal. Human. He stumbled back, flashlight shaking. "Jesus Christ!" Rex barked again, circling the spot, nose close to the bone, whining softly now, as if the smell hurt him. Jack stared at the fragment, pale against the wooden floor. He tried to convince himself it was just old debris, part of some animal, but the shape was unmistakable. A finger bone. Outside, the wind shifted. For a moment, the whole cabin seemed to breathe. He threw another log on the fire and sat in the old armchair, eyes fixed on the fireplace. Rex lay at his feet but refused to rest. His head was up, ears pointed toward the wall. Hours passed. The storm grew worse, rattling the windows. Jack drifted in and out of shallow sleep, haunted by flashes of sand, smoke, the smell of gunpowder. Then again, the knocking. This time, from beneath the floorboards, 3 taps. Then silence. Jack's eyes opened wide. Rex was already standing, muscles coiled, staring at the ground in front of the hearth. The sound came again. Dull, steady, like someone tapping wood from underneath. Jack grabbed the flashlight and crouched. "No way," he whispered. He pressed his hand to the floor. The vibration was real. Faint, but there. He followed it to the far corner, where one floorboard was darker than the rest, its nails newer. He pried it up with his knife. Cold air rose from below. A small gap, deep enough for something to be hidden. Rex whined softly. Jack shone the light down and froze. A metal box sat just beneath the planks, half buried in dirt and ash. The top was engraved with a name, barely legible under grime. M. Hale. The wind slammed against the cabin again, shaking the walls. Jack looked at Rex, who was still staring into the hole, eyes gleaming in the firelight. For the first time in years, Jack felt the old instinct rise in him, the sense that he wasn't alone, that danger was near. He closed the board, sat back slowly, and whispered, "Whatever this place is, we just woke it up." Outside, the storm howled. Inside, the cabin went still again. Too still. Rex didn't lie down that night. He just watched the fireplace, silent, waiting for something only he could sense. The storm had quieted overnight, leaving the world outside buried under a white silence. Frost clung to the windows, blurring the outline of the pines. Jack woke to the sound of soft scratching. Rex again, paws pressing at the floorboards near the hearth. "Still on that spot?" Jack muttered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The dog didn't look up. His tail was stiff, his body coiled like a spring. Jack knelt beside him, tracing the lines of the floor with his hand until he felt it. A slight dip where one board met the next. The grain had been sanded unevenly, and a faint trace of dried mortar lined the edge. Someone had patched something there, and not long ago. He fetched his tool bag from the truck and pried at the board. The wood resisted, then gave with a groan, releasing a breath of cold, earthy air. Beneath it, a layer of loose bricks had been arranged like a lid. One brick was darker than the rest, its edges still slick with newer mortar. Jack chipped it away carefully. When the brick came free, dust drifted into his face. He coughed and reached inside. His fingers touched something hard and cold, a small rusted tin box. He lifted it out and set it on the floor. The box was heavy, sealed tight, and the surface was etched with corrosion. Rex sniffed it, then recoiled, ears flattening. He growled low, not in fear but in recognition, as if he sensed what it was before Jack did. Jack forced the latch open with a screwdriver. The lid snapped loose, and the smell hit him first, metallic, sharp, faintly sweet. Inside lay fragments of bone, brittle and yellowed, wrapped in what remained of a plastic sheet. There was also a leather-bound notebook, swollen from age, its pages spotted with mold. Jack's stomach tightened. Jesus! He didn't want to believe it, but the size and shape were unmistakable, part of a human forearm. He backed away, exhaling hard. Rex barked, loud and urgent, startling the silence. The sound echoed through the cabin, bounced off the windows. "What is it, boy?" Rex dashed to the front door, claws scraping the wood. He barked again, this time toward the outside. Jack grabbed his coat, flashlight, and followed. The air outside was crisp, the kind that burns your lungs with the first breath. Snow lay undisturbed around the porch, except for one thing. A single line of footprints cut across the clearing, leading away from the cabin. The prints were deep, fresh, and human. Jack stared at them, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. No one should have been here. The storm had wiped every trace clean overnight, yet these tracks were sharp, unblurred, no more than an hour old. They vanished into the tree line. Rex growled, the fur on his back rising. He sniffed the first footprint, then turned his gaze to Jack, waiting for a command. Jack shook his head. "No, we're not chasing shadows." He forced a laugh that didn't sound like him. Probably a hiker, or some kid screwing around. But he knew no one hiked in Pine Hollow this time of year. The nearest road was 10 miles away. Whoever had come through had known exactly where this cabin was. He followed the tracks a few feet into the trees before stopping. The pattern of the boots was military, tread deep and even. He'd worn the same kind for years. The tracks ended at a fallen log. Beyond that, only untouched snow, as if the person had simply disappeared. Rex whined low, circling the spot. His nose went to the bark of the log, then down again, tracing a faint streak in the snow, rust-colored, like dried blood. Jack's breath caught. He reached down, touched it, rubbed the flakes between his fingers. They smelled faintly of iron and something chemical, like old oil. He wiped his hand on his jeans and turned back toward the cabin. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals. The tin box sat open on the table. Jack set the bone fragment aside and picked up the notebook. The leather cracked as he turned the first page. A neat, old-fashioned handwriting filled the lines. Mason Hale, environmental engineer, Silver Hollow Mining Company, 1974. Jack frowned. He flipped further through the pages. The entries were short, written like a journal mixed with lab notes. Contamination spreading faster than expected. Children in town falling sick. Sheriff says to keep quiet until the inspection. The last entry stopped mid-sentence. If they find out what we dumped under. The ink trailed off in a blot. Tucked inside the back cover were 3 small glass vials, sealed with wax, half filled with thick, reddish sludge. Dried mud clung to their sides, the same shade as the streak Jack had seen in the snow. He placed them on the table. They clicked softly against the wood. Rex sniffed them once and sneezed, shaking his head violently. Whatever was in those vials, it carried a scent no animal wanted to breathe. Jack sat back in the chair, mind racing. Mason Hale, 1974. The same year people in town said the cabin's last owner vanished. He remembered the old man at the gas station whispering about the one who went missing after the mine shut down. He flipped the notebook open again. On one page, pressed flat and yellowed, was a photograph. 5 men stood in front of a mine entrance, all wearing hard hats, smiling awkwardly. One of them, the youngest, had M. Hale scribbled under his image. The others were labeled with initials, except the last man, his face scratched out with a pen. Jack traced the scratched face with his thumb. The ink had torn the photo. Rex let out a low rumble. Jack looked up. The dog was staring toward the window, ears twitching. "Someone out there," Jack whispered. He grabbed the flashlight again, sweeping the beam across the snow outside. Nothing moved. Then, faintly, just at the edge of the trees, a reflection, like light bouncing off metal. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. He clicked off the flashlight and waited. The only sound the slow, rhythmic breathing of the dog beside him. After a minute, Rex turned his head back to the fireplace, staring into the flames. Jack followed his gaze. On the stone, near where he'd found the box, a dark line of soot formed a faint shape. Letters, half hidden by ash. He leaned closer. "Help us." Jack stumbled back, blinking hard, but when he looked again, the soot was gone. Only the flicker of firelight remained. He sat in silence for a long time, the notebook open in his hands, Rex's head resting against his knee. The cabin felt smaller now, the air heavier, as if the walls were listening. Whatever Mason Hale had tried to hide 50 years ago hadn't stayed buried. Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears snapping upright, and gave a short, sharp bark, one that meant only one thing in their years together. Someone was near. Jack reached for his rifle by the door, loaded it quietly, and whispered, "Stay with me, buddy." The wind outside began to rise again, whistling through the cracks, but underneath it, faint and distinct, came the crunch of footsteps in the snow. They stopped right outside the cabin door. By morning, the storm had loosened its grip on Pine Hollow. The sky was still grey, but the wind had calmed, leaving the town shrouded in a thin mist. Jack parked his truck outside the general store, the old engine coughing like it didn't want to stop. Rex jumped out first, landing in the slush with a low grunt, tail stiff as a metronome. The town looked like it had been frozen in time. One street, a few tired buildings, a gas pump from the 70s. The flag outside the sheriff's office hung limp, frozen stiff. Jack pulled his coat tight and walked toward the hardware store. A bell jingled when he opened the door, and everyone inside turned to look at him. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Two men at the counter dropped their eyes to their coffee. A woman arranging shelves pretended to check inventory. Jack felt their stares like weight on his back. He nodded once. "Morning." The store clerk, a man in his 60s with a red beard and heavy eyes, gave a slow nod. "You must be the fellow that bought the cabin up by Hollow Ridge." "That's right," Jack said. "Just need some supplies. Nails, fuel, flashlight, batteries." The clerk hesitated. "You sure you want to stay out there? That place—" His voice trailed off, but the meaning hung in the air. Jack gave a tired half-smile. "I've lived in worse places." The clerk leaned closer, lowering his voice. "It's not the cold you should worry about. Folks say that house don't take kindly to strangers. The last man who lived there, well, he just disappeared. Sheriff said he probably fell in the lake, but—" He stopped himself, glancing towards the door. "Anyway, no one stayed longer than a week since." Jack met his eyes. "You believe that?" The clerk shook his head, uneasy. "I believe the ground keeps what it wants." Rex growled softly, sensing the tension. His fur bristled as a shadow filled the doorway behind them. Sheriff Dale Riker stepped inside, brushing snow from his hat. "Morning, Tom," he said to the clerk, then turned his easy grin toward Jack. "You must be Mr. Monroe. Heard you moved into the old Hale place." Jack didn't offer a handshake. "That's right." Riker looked him over, boots to shoulders, pausing on the faint scar under Jack's eye. "Military, huh?" Jack nodded. "Retired Navy." Riker smiled. "Appreciate your service. Can't say we get many war heroes up this way. What brings you to Pine Hollow?" "Peace," Jack said simply. "Can't fault a man for that." The sheriff's gaze drifted past him to the counter, where the clerk was bagging nails. "Just so you know, there's been reports of trespassers near that cabin. Kids, maybe. You see anything strange, you call it in." "I'll keep that in mind." Riker tapped the counter with a gloved hand. "One more thing. Heard from a fella you've been doing some renovations, digging around under the floorboards?" Jack froze. He hadn't told anyone about that. "Just fixing old boards. Cabin's falling apart." The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sure. Wouldn't want you stirring up anything that should stay buried. Rex barked once, sharp and loud, breaking the silence. His teeth flashed white as he positioned himself between Jack and Riker. The sheriff raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy there, soldier. No harm meant." Jack's voice was calm, but the edge was clear. He doesn't like people standing too close. Riker's smirk faded. He tipped his hat. "Good dog. Keep him close. You never know what's prowling in those woods." When Riker left, the door swung shut, and for a moment the room stayed silent. The clerk muttered, "Man's got a way of showing up where he ain't needed." Jack grabbed his bag, thanked the man, and left. Outside, the cold bit harder. Rex trotted beside him, sniffing the air, his tail still low. Jack stopped near the truck, looking across the street. The sheriff's cruiser was parked by the cafe, its windows fogged. Inside, Riker sat alone, watching. Jack met his gaze through the glass. The sheriff raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. Back at the cabin, the day fell quiet again. The light faded early, the forest swallowing the last of the sun. Jack unloaded his supplies, started the fire, and tried to shake the feeling that someone had been in his house while he was gone. The floorboard he'd pried open was shut, but a thin line of dust ran along its edge, disturbed. He knelt to check it. The tin box was still there, though slightly moved, as if someone had lifted it and set it back down. Rex paced the room, nose twitching. Then suddenly he stopped at the window, growling. Jack followed his gaze. Out in the snow, tire tracks, fresh ones, cut across the clearing. No one else should have been there. Jack grabbed his flashlight, swept the beam outside. The woods were still, only the wind moving through the branches. But under the window, pressed against the glass, was a faint smear, like the print of a gloved hand. He stepped back slowly. Someone was here. Rex growled again, deeper this time, low and warning. Jack turned off the light, grabbed his rifle and sat by the fire, waiting. Hours passed. The storm returned, soft at first, then heavier. Jack dozed in the chair, Rex curled at his feet. A creak outside snapped them both awake. Footsteps in the snow, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. Rex rose, teeth bared, tail stiff. Jack peered through the window. In the blur of snowlight, he saw a shape, a man's silhouette near the tree line, standing still, watching the cabin. Jack opened the door, rifle raised. "Who's out there?" No answer, just the wind. The figure turned, blending into the darkness. Rex lunged forward, barking furiously, pulling against Jack's command. "Stay!" Jack hissed, grabbing his collar. The shape vanished into the trees. Jack shut the door and bolted it. His heart pounded against his ribs. He went to the window again. The snow had already begun to cover the footprints. By midnight, the storm howled louder. Jack couldn't sleep. He sat near the dying fire, staring at the door. Rex stayed awake too, head on his paws but eyes open, watching. Then, faintly, from outside, metal tapping against glass. Jack froze. He turned his head slowly toward the window. Through the frost, a face appeared for a split second, then was gone. Rex snarled, lunging at the door. Jack grabbed the rifle and threw it open, stepping onto the porch. Only snow met him, endless and quiet. The forest beyond was empty. He lowered the gun, exhaled, and turned back towards the cabin. At the window, half hidden by firelight, Sheriff Riker's reflection stared back for a moment before fading into the night. The night came heavy with wind. The flames in the fireplace swayed and cracked, throwing nervous light across the walls. Jack sat by the table, the journal of Mason Hale still open before him. Every page he turned was another bruise on the truth. Notes of contamination, secret payments, and one haunting phrase repeated again and again. "If they silence me, the earth will tell." Rex lay near the hearth, eyes half open but never still. Every gust outside made his ears twitch. Jack poured himself a drink, the amber liquid trembling in the glass. Sleep never came easy. When he closed his eyes, it was never darkness that came first. It was fire. He was back there again. Iraq, 2010. The air thick with sand and smoke, sirens wailing in broken rhythm. His unit had been ambushed during a convoy run. Jack remembered the sound of the explosion before the heat, the world flipping sideways, the deafening silence afterward. He'd come to half buried in rubble, his ears ringing, blood pooling down his arm. Through the haze, he'd seen movement, a silhouette crawling toward him. Not a man. Rex, younger, leaner, his coat dark with dust and soot. The dog limped, dragging one paw, but he pushed toward Jack, whining, refusing to stop. Then came the secondary blast. Jack had shouted, "Stay back!" But Rex ignored it. He lunged forward, teeth gripping the strap of Jack's vest, and pulled. Metal screamed as the truck behind them went up in flames. They hit the ground together, Rex covering Jack's head as the shockwave passed. When the smoke cleared, the rest of the unit was gone. Just the two of them, breathing, bleeding, alive. The memory snapped away when the fire popped loud enough to make him flinch. Rex lifted his head, watching. Jack rubbed his temple. "You still saving my ass, huh?" Rex blinked slowly, as if he understood. Then came the sound. A soft tapping, distant but deliberate. 3 beats, then pause, 2 more. Jack froze. His hand tightened around the flashlight. "You hear that?" Rex was already on his feet, ears forward, body tense. The sound came again, this time clearer. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, like code. Jack crouched low, pressing his ear to the floor. The vibrations were faint but steady, echoing beneath the planks. He grabbed the crowbar and pried the floorboard loose again, sweeping the flashlight across the dark cavity below. Nothing. Just the same bricks and dirt. Then the tapping started again, this time from the far corner, beneath the wall. Jack crawled closer, tracing the direction. The beam of the flashlight revealed a narrow gap behind the old storage shelves. He moved them aside, the wood groaning against the floor. Behind it was a small opening in the wall, an old vent or tunnel, half collapsed and hidden by boards. Rex pushed his nose into the gap, sniffing hard. His body stiffened, tail low, the way he always did when scenting something unnatural. Then he barked once, sharp and warning. All right, Jack whispered, grabbing his gear. "Let's see what they buried." He widened the opening with the crowbar, the wood snapping under the strain. Cold air rushed out, heavy with the smell of earth, rust, and something else. Rot long dried. He crouched, shined the light inside. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to crawl. The walls were lined with old timber, eaten by moisture. Rex barked again, then, without waiting, squeezed himself in first. "Rex, hold on!" Jack followed, dragging himself through the dirt. The beam caught glints of metal, pipes, old nails, something like wiring. The air grew colder the farther they went. Every sound was amplified. The scrape of his boots, the dog's breath, the echo of water dripping somewhere ahead. The tunnel sloped downward before leveling out. Jack felt the floor change under his hands, concrete. The walls became smoother, and the air thickened with dust. Then the light caught something odd. New patch of cement, brighter grey than the surrounding wall, the surface clean, almost recent. Rex growled, pawing at it, claws scraping the fresh surface. Jack ran his hand across it. The cement was still cold but smooth, no cracks, no wear. Someone sealed this not long ago. He muttered. The tapping came again, this time from behind the cement. Jack jerked back. Rex barked furiously, pressing his snout against the wall, whining in agitation. "Hey," Jack said softly, voice trembling despite himself. "It's okay, boy." But Rex wouldn't calm down. He paced, barking louder, his voice echoing through the narrow tunnel until it felt like there were two of him down there. Jack raised his flashlight, focusing on the edges of the cement patch. There, tiny impressions of fingertips near the bottom, like someone had pressed them in before it dried. Next to it, faint scratches formed the outline of a single word: hail. Jack felt the back of his neck prickle. Behind him, something shifted in the darkness, air moving where it shouldn't. He turned fast, flashlight cutting across empty space. Nothing there, only the sound of wind pushing faintly through unseen cracks. Then, from the other side of the wall, a dull metallic thud. Once. Twice. Rex pressed against his leg, hackles raised. Jack took a slow breath, stepped closer to the sealed section, and put his palm flat on it. The surface was cold, but there was vibration, like something alive, faint but constant. "Someone's behind here," he whispered. He raised the crowbar, ready to strike, but stopped. A whisper bled through the concrete, so soft he thought he imagined it. A voice, broken and muffled. It sounded like a man. "Help us!" Jack staggered back, nearly dropping the light. "What the hell?" Rex barked wildly, claws tearing at the floor near the wall, dirt flying. The whisper faded as quickly as it came, swallowed by the silence. Jack's pulse thundered in his ears. He tried to steady his breathing, to make sense of what he'd heard. There was no one alive behind that wall. Couldn't be. It was sealed decades ago. He turned to crawl back, but Rex refused to move. The dog sat facing the cement, ears flattened, a low whine escaping his throat, eyes locked on the wall like he was watching something Jack couldn't see. Jack reached down, resting a hand on his back. "We'll come back, boy, not tonight." When they crawled out of the tunnel, the fire in the cabin had nearly gone out. Jack sealed the vent with the old boards again and leaned against the wall, chest heaving. The wind outside rose suddenly, banging the shutters against the frame. Then, somewhere beneath the floor, faint but unmistakable, came that same pattern of knocks. 3 short, 2 long. Morse code. Jack stared at the floor, whispering the translation under his breath. SOS. Rex turned his head toward him, eyes burning in the firelight. Neither of them slept that night. The snow had turned into grey slush along the winding road to town. Jack drove with one hand on the wheel, the other wrapped around a thermos of coffee that had long gone cold. Rex sat in the back seat, staring out the window, silent but alert. His ears twitched every time a branch cracked under the weight of melting snow. Jack hadn't planned to go back into Pine Hollow so soon, but after the night in the tunnel, he needed new batteries, fuel, and maybe a straight answer from someone. The people in that town knew more than they admitted. Halfway down the road, he saw a black SUV parked across the narrow path, blocking his way. The windows were tinted, the engine running, exhaust curling into the cold air. Jack slowed to a stop. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed too clean for the mud and ice. His dark coat shimmered faintly under the grey light. He walked with the easy confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Jack rolled the window down halfway. "Something wrong?" The man smiled, all teeth and charm. "Nothing wrong at all, Mr. Monroe. You're a hard man to catch." Jack's instincts tightened. "You've got me at a disadvantage." "Charles Danton," the man said, tapping the SUV door with his gloved hand. "I run the Silver Hollow Company, or what's left of it." Jack recognized the name immediately. He'd seen it in Mason Hale's journal, scrawled in the margins next to words like hush money and waste runoff. "Silver Hollow went bankrupt 40 years ago," Jack said. Danton chuckled softly. "Names change, ownership shifts, but the land still breathes the same air." He glanced past Jack toward the direction of the cabin. "You picked a fine piece of property up there. $500. That's almost theft. Jack stared at him, waiting. Danton stepped closer, resting his hand on the truck door. I'll make you a fair offer. 20,000. Cash. You sign the deed and you can drive away today. That's generous for a cabin full of rot and rats. Danton smiled wider, but his eyes didn't. Let's just say the ground it sits on has potential. There's a spring that runs beneath those hills, an aquifer rich in minerals. We're interested in developing a bottling site. You'd be doing yourself a favor, Mr. Monroe. That place has a history. Not one you want to live in. Jack's grip on the wheel tightened. I'm not selling. Danton's expression didn't change. He gave a short laugh, low and amused. You're a stubborn man. Must be the military in you. But take my advice. Some things buried under that land are better left alone. He stepped back and tapped the roof of the truck twice, then turned to his SUV. Enjoy your peace and quiet while you can. Jack watched him drive off, the black vehicle disappearing into the snow like it had been swallowed by the trees. Rex growled softly in the back seat. I know, Jack said under his breath. I don't trust him either. He drove back toward the cabin, eyes on the mirror. The road behind was empty, but he couldn't shake the feeling he was being followed. By dusk, the wind had picked up again, scattering flakes across the clearing. Jack parked the truck and stepped out, scanning the tree line. Everything was still. Too still. Inside, he threw another log on the fire, sat at the table, and reread Hale's final entries. The ink was smudged, words faint but desperate. They came at night, told me it was just business. I can still hear the trucks. Rex barked suddenly from the porch. Jack grabbed his rifle and ran outside. The air was sharp and quiet, the kind of silence that makes your pulse sound loud. Rex stood at the edge of the porch, teeth bared, staring into the woods. Jack followed his gaze but saw nothing. Then he heard it, a low hum, distant but distinct. An engine idling somewhere nearby. Stay close, Jack whispered. Rex barked again, moving toward the steps. The noise grew louder for a second, then stopped. The forest went dead silent. Something landed on the porch with a dull thud. Jack spun, rifle raised. A piece of paper fluttered across the boards, weighed down by a chunk of ice. He kicked the ice aside and bent down. It wasn't paper. It was a photograph. Old and yellowed, the corners burned. A group of men stood shoulder to shoulder in front of a mine entrance. The words Silver Hollow Mining, Comanpro 1974 were scrawled across the bottom. Jack recognized one of the faces, Mason Hale. The others looked vaguely familiar, except for one man standing in the center. Younger, slimmer, but unmistakable. Charles Danton. Across the top of the photo, written in faded black ink, was a single phrase. They knew. Jack turned the photo over. The back was stained, the edges frayed, but a set of numbers had been scribbled hastily, coordinates by the look of them. He looked up sharply. The sound of branches cracking came from the trees again. Rex bolted forward, barking into the dark. Jack raised the flashlight, catching a glimpse of movement, someone slipping between the pines, fast. He fired a warning shot into the air. The echo tore through the night, but whoever it was kept running. Jack knelt, checking the snow at the edge of the woods. Fresh footprints. Big ones. He followed them a few steps until they vanished near the creek where the ice was cracked. When he turned back, Rex stood guard on the porch, still barking, the photo clenched in his teeth. "Good boy," Jack said, taking it from him. Inside, he spread the picture on the table beside the journal and stared at the coordinates. He cross-referenced them with the map he'd found in Hale's notebook. The numbers pointed to a section of land barely a mile behind the cabin, an old drainage pit marked restricted. Jack felt the weight of it pressing on him. Danton hadn't wanted the cabin. He wanted what lay under it. He sat back, staring into the fire. Outside, the wind howled again, sweeping snow against the windows like claws. Rex shifted suddenly, ears twitching. The dog growled low, eyes fixed on the door. Jack reached for his rifle. "What is it now?" A soft metallic sound came from the porch. Jack moved slowly towards the window and looked out. His stomach turned cold. Someone had placed something new on the steps. A small tin can, the same size as the one he'd found under the floor, except this one was freshly cleaned, gleaming under the moonlight. He opened the door, snow swirling in. The can rattled in the wind. Inside it was a note, written on torn parchment. "Stop digging." The message wasn't signed, but Jack didn't need to guess who had sent it. He stood in the doorway, breath fogging the air, staring out into the dark woods. Rex pressed against his leg, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Jack whispered, "Let them come." The fire behind them flickered, and for a moment the reflection on the window showed two figures standing together. The man and the dog, watching a war about to start all over again. Jack waited until dawn before moving. The snow had stopped, leaving the world outside coated in a pale stillness that made every sound echo. He'd barely slept. The warning note sat on the table beside the photo, both weighted down by his coffee mug. The coordinates burned in his mind. He strapped on his gloves and grabbed the crowbar. "Come on, boy," he said quietly. Rex was already standing by the hatch, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the floorboards where the faint tapping had first begun nights ago. The dog knew. Instinct or memory, it didn't matter. He always knew. Jack pried the boards open, the wood creaking like a wound reopening. Cold air seeped up from the darkness below, carrying the same smell, earth, rust, and something chemical, sharp and bitter. With the flashlight and rope, he climbed down, Rex close behind, paws landing soundlessly in the dirt. The tunnel felt tighter than before. Every sound, his breathing, the scraping of his boots, seemed swallowed by the weight of the earth. They reached the cemented wall. Jack ran his hand over the spot again. The surface was still unnervingly smooth, too recent for a structure this old. He took the crowbar and swung. The first strike sent a dull crack through the tunnel. Dust filled the air. Rex barked once, the sound muffled by the close space. Another swing. The cement began to flake. Then again, harder. A fissure opened across the center. Rex pawed at the base, claws scraping loose dirt. He backed up, whining impatiently. Jack slammed the bar once more. The wall gave with a sharp echo, breaking open in chunks. A gust of air rushed out, cold, stale, and laced with the scent of metal and decay. He aimed the flashlight through the hole. What lay beyond wasn't just more tunnel, it was a chamber. The beam landed on shapes half buried in dust. A desk, a chair, metal filing cabinets tipped on their sides. And in the corner, something that made Jack's chest tighten. A rusted safe, its door half sealed by old cement. He stepped through carefully, boots sinking into the soft dirt. Papers lay scattered everywhere, yellowed and fragile, covered in soot. Rex sniffed the ground, then moved towards the safe, barking sharply. Jack knelt beside it. The hinges were brittle, but the lock had long corroded. One good hit with the crowbar, and it snapped. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed through the chamber. Inside were folders wrapped in plastic sheeting, their edges burned. He pulled them out one by one. Silver Hollow Mining Co. Internal Audit, 1974. Toxic Waste Disposal. Chemical Runoff Reports. Confidential Transaction Records. Jack flipped through the pages quickly. There were signatures, Charles Danton's among them, and bank receipts showing payments to local officials. Reports from engineers about a containment failure and groundwater contamination. Then, tucked between the documents, a smaller envelope sealed with tape. Written across the front, "To whoever finds this." He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed and stained. The handwriting was unsteady, almost fading. "I can't live with what we did. They told us to dump the waste into the creek. Said it would dilute, said no one would know. Then the fish died first, then the kids. I begged them to stop. They laughed. If you find this, please, don't let them bury it again. Mason Hale." Jack stared at the letter, his throat dry. He could almost hear the man's voice through the ink. Tired, broken, desperate. Rex let out a low growl. His head turned toward the tunnel they came from. The faint sound of footsteps echoed from the other side. Jack's blood ran cold. He turned off the flashlight and crouched, listening. The sound grew clearer, a boot scraping stone, then another. Someone was down there with them. He whispered, "Quiet." Rex went still, muscles coiled. A faint beam of light cut through the tunnel ahead. A voice followed. "Mr. Monroe, you down there?" "Sheriff Riker." Jack didn't answer. He slipped the papers and the letter into his backpack, heart pounding. Riker's voice came closer, echoing in the tight space. "Now don't make this difficult, son. You've been poking where you shouldn't. Mr. Danton's mighty concerned. Just hand over what you found, and we'll forget this ever happened." Jack tightened his grip on the crowbar. "You working for Danton now?" A pause, then a chuckle. "I work for whoever keeps this town alive. You think people here want to dig up the past? You think they want to know why their water's still undrinkable?" Rex barked, sharp and warning. The flashlight beam swayed as Riker flinched. "Control your mutt." Jack stepped into the light, face hard. "You're not taking this." Riker raised his gun. "I don't want to shoot you, Jack, but I will if I have to." Rex growled louder, teeth bared, body crouched. The sound filled the chamber like thunder. Riker hesitated. "That dog takes one step, I'll—" He didn't finish. Rex lunged. The gun went off, the shot deafening in the tunnel. The bullet hit the ceiling, showering dust and concrete. Riker stumbled back, cursing, flashlight tumbling from his hand. Jack tackled him before he could recover, knocking the gun away. They struggled in the dirt, boots slipping. Riker grabbed at Jack's throat, but Jack slammed the crowbar down beside his head, hard enough to make him stop fighting. Breathing heavy, Jack snatched the gun and tossed it aside. "You're going to tell me what Danton's hiding," he said. Riker spat blood, glaring up at him. "You think you're some kind of hero? You'll be dead before sunrise." Jack stood, shaking with adrenaline. "Maybe, but I'm not the one burying kids for a paycheck." He motioned to Rex. "Let's go." They ran through the tunnel, the light from the flashlight swinging wildly. Behind them, Riker's voice echoed through the dark, hoarse and furious. "You don't know what you started, Monroe." They climbed out into the cabin, just as the first light of dawn touched the snow outside. Jack slammed the hatch shut, locking it tight. His hands were still trembling as he threw the pack onto the table. He opened it again, staring at the documents, at Mason Hale's letter. Proof. Real, undeniable proof. Rex came to his side, pressing his head against Jack's knee. Jack looked down, hand resting on the dog's fur. "Good work, buddy," he whispered. "We're in deep now." Outside, an engine roared to life somewhere beyond the tree line. Not one, two, maybe three. The sound of tires crunching snow. Jack stepped to the window. Black SUVs, coming fast. He loaded his rifle, heart steady now. "They're not going to bury this again," he said quietly. Rex growled low. Ready. The cabin was no longer just shelter. It was a line in the snow. And tonight, someone would cross it. The storm rolled in before sunset, a wall of white swallowing the forest. The wind howled like something alive, rattling the old shutters of the cabin. Jack had nailed plywood across the windows, but it wasn't the cold that made him uneasy. It was the silence that came between the gusts, that empty pause where danger always hid. Rex lay near the door, tail thumping once, twice, every time thunder rolled through the valley. Jack checked the barricades again, checked the rifle, then checked the pack with Mason Hale's files. The letter sat on top like a heartbeat. Don't let them bury it again. Tires crunched on the frozen road. Headlights cut through the snow. Jack killed the lantern. The room fell to a low orange from the fire, just enough to see the shape of his dog raise his head. Through the crack in the board, Jack saw 3 figures step out of 2 SUVs. 2 carried rifles. The third wore a badge like a shield he didn't deserve. Sheriff Riker. "Jack Monroe!" Riker shouted through the wind. "You're under arrest for assaulting an officer and tampering with state property. Come out with your hands up." Jack didn't move. He slid the safety off. "Not tonight." The men split. One circled toward the back. Another hugged the wall beneath the kitchen window. The glass spider-webbed under a suppressed shot. Jack fired a warning blast through the front slit. A figure dropped into the snow and crawled out of sight. Rex was already at the rear door, body coiled. The back latch snapped. A masked man pushed through the gap, rifle first. Rex launched like a spring, colliding with him in a chaos of limbs and snow. The rifle skittered across the floor. "Down!" Jack barked, swinging the rifle toward the second man at the corner. He shot into the drift as a warning. The man froze, then bolted. A muzzle flash flared from outside. The shot punched through the doorframe and skimmed low. Rex jerked and stumbled, a sharp yelp tearing out of him as he turned back toward Jack. Jack's chest went hollow for a second. He lifted Rex under the chest and dragged him behind the overturned table. Blood streaked the planks, bright against the wood. The bullet grazed his ribs. Jack said aloud, forcing his breath steady as he assessed with his hands. A shallow wound that bled heavily but missed vital organs. Rex's ears were flat, eyes locked on Jack's face, waiting for orders even now. "You're okay," Jack said, voice low, certain. "I've got you." He yanked open the old metal first aid kit mounted by the door and went to work with the muscle memory of a dozen field nights. Headlamp on, shears out. He trimmed the fur around the groove, checked for entry and exit, slid gloved fingers gently along the ribs for crepitus. Nothing. Breath sounds even. Good. He rinsed the wound with saline until the water ran pink to clear. He pressed hemostatic gauze into the channel, firm, steady pressure for a slow count of 60. Rex held still, jaw tight, eyes never leaving Jack. "Stay," Jack murmured. "Breathe with me." He laid sterile pads, wrapped them with elastic bandage, then reinforced with vet wrap from the kit. Not too tight. He lifted Rex's lip and checked capillary refill. Pink in under 2 seconds. He covered the dog with a space blanket to keep him warm, slid a rolled jacket under his chest to elevate, then tightened the tourniquet he'd improvised around the bleeding earlier and confirmed he didn't need it now. He didn't. He loosened and removed it. Outside, Riker shouted new orders, the wind stealing half the words. The men regrouped. One voice rose, angry and afraid. "Torch it!" A bottle arced. Fire bloomed across the snowbank, licking the boards. Jack grabbed the old radio from the shelf and slammed it onto the table beside Hale's files. He clipped leads to the battery backup, flipped the toggles, tuned past dead air to a frequency he knew by feel. "This is Jack Monroe at Pine Hollow. I have proof of a 50-year cover-up tied to Silver Hollow and Charles Danton. I am transmitting documents now." Static hissed. Then a voice cut through, thin and hard as wire. "Monroe, this is a lane across. I'm on your signal. Send everything." He patched the laptop to the shortwave rig. The progress bar crawled. The cabin shook with another blast. A second bottle shattered against the porch, flames clawing up the rail. Rex pushed up, tried to stand. Jack put a hand on his shoulder. "Easy. Guard." The dog settled, low growl rumbling, eyes on the door. 70%, 90%. The lights flickered. The backup battery whined. "Hold," Jack said, like he was talking to a scared recruit or a failing engine. "Just hold." Outside, a shadow rose at the broken window. Jack fired low. The figure dropped away, cursing. 100%. The laptop chimed. "Received," Elena said. "We're mirroring it across 3 outlets and an evidence drop. Stay put. Help is inbound." Riker's voice came closer, ragged with fury. "You think that saves you? You think anybody's coming up this mountain in a whiteout?" Jack picked up the rifle and looked at Rex, the dog's ears tipped forward. "All business, all heart." "They will," Jack said. He raised his voice. "It's over, Sheriff." Gunfire stitched the siding. Jack rolled to the side, returned 2 fast shots as the flames popped and threw sparks into the wind. Then the weather shifted. The storm hit a lull, a sudden pocket of stillness. In that pocket, everyone heard it, the soft, distant chop of rotor blades. Riker faltered. "Back to the cars!" Jack didn't chase. He stayed with Rex, palm resting over the bandage, feeling the shallow, steady rise and fall. He checked the wrap once more, slipped 2 fingers under the gauze to be sure it wasn't constricting, and dosed a small measure of pain meds from the canine kit he'd kept since deployment. Rex accepted it without a sound, eyes never leaving the door. The flames outside guttered in the rotor wash as the helicopter banked low over the tree line, floodlight washing the clearing in hard white. Voices on loudspeakers, commands. The crunch of boots that weren't running this time. Jack let his shoulders drop for the first time all night. He leaned his forehead to Rex's. "You held the line," he whispered. "You did your job. Now let them do theirs." Rex gave a soft huff, that old quiet answer he'd used since the desert, the kind that meant copy, understood. Sirens climbed the switchback road. The wind came back, colder and cleaner, blowing smoke away from the door. And inside the torn little room, with blood drying on the planks and truth humming across the airwaves, the dog closed his eyes for the briefest moment, not from weakness but from trust. He was still guarding, and so was the man beside him. Morning broke over Pine Hollow like an old wound reopening. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky the color of ash and a silence too heavy to be peace. Smoke curled from what remained of the cabin, blackened logs, half buried under snow, and the faint glow of embers fighting against the cold. Jack sat in the snow, his coat singed, face streaked with soot. He held Rex's head in his lap, pressing a torn blanket against the dog's ribs. The shepherd's breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes open and alert despite the pain. "You're all right, boy," Jack murmured, voice hoarse. "You made it." The sound of rotor blades broke the silence. A helicopter crested the ridge, whipping up spirals of snow as it descended into the clearing. The downwash sent ash swirling across the ruins like black feathers. Rex stirred, trying to lift his head. His ears perked weakly at the sound. Jack shaded his eyes as the side door of the helicopter slid open. A woman stepped out, her parka hood snapping in the wind. Elena Cross. She jumped down before the blades had even slowed, followed by 2 FBI agents in heavy gear. "Jack Monroe!" she shouted over the roar. He stood, nodding once. "That's me." She ran toward him, eyes scanning the wreckage, then landing on Rex. "Dear God," she whispered. "You weren't exaggerating." Jack managed a grim smile. "You get the files?" "They're all over the airwaves," she said. "Every outlet, every agency. You just cracked open the biggest cover-up in this state's history." One of the agents handed her a radio. She spoke quickly into it. "We've located the primary source, requesting backup units to detain suspects. Names: Charles Danton, Sheriff Dale Riker." Jack's jaw tightened at the sound of those names. "You'll find them on the Ridge Road. They ran before sunrise. Elena's expression hardened. We already did. She turned the radio toward him. From it came the static-laced voice of a field agent. Both suspects in custody. Danton attempted to flee toward the Silver Hollow mine entrance. Riker surrendered after brief resistance. We've recovered ledgers, waste manifests, and signed payout documents. Jack exhaled slowly, almost in disbelief. Elena crouched beside him, gloved hand brushing soot from a bent photo that had fallen near the snow. Mason Hale and a group of workers standing proudly in front of the mine. She said quietly, 50 years. That's how long it took for his voice to reach daylight. Jack looked toward the charred remains of the cabin, the tunnel beneath now caved in by fire and frost. He wasn't the only one waiting, he said. Rex whimpered softly. Jack stroked his head. This dog. He found what everyone else was too afraid to see. Elena's eyes softened. Then I guess we owe him the truth. An agent approached. Ma'am, we've confirmed the contamination spread through the creek system. Early reports show long-term mercury poisoning. Birth. Defects. Whole generations affected. Silver Hollow was paying hush money to local officials for decades. Elena closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. Get those records to Washington. I'll stay here. The agent nodded and stepped away. Jack sat back down beside Rex, watching the team move through the ruins with cameras and evidence bags. One lifted a scorched folder from the debris, its pages still intact enough to read the company's logo. It was the same file he'd risked everything for. The weight of it hit him all at once. The years of silence, the families who never knew why their wells turned black, the kids whose names had faded from gravestones no one visited anymore. He looked down at Rex again. The dog's breathing had steadied. His fur, singed and matted, was still warm beneath Jack's hand. You did it, Jack whispered. We did it. Elena knelt beside them. You know, when I first read Mason Hale's notes, he said something strange. He wrote that the truth has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. I didn't believe him until today. Jack smiled faintly. Maybe it didn't claw. Maybe it barked. That earned a small laugh from her. She looked at Rex and said softly, Then he was the real hero. The helicopter's blades started to spin again, the snow lifting like ghosts. An agent motioned for them to board. Jack hesitated, looking back one last time at the ruins of the cabin, the place that had almost killed him, and somehow saved him too. Elena touched his arm. Come on, there's a vet team waiting at the base. He lifted Rex carefully, wrapping the blanket tighter around him. As they stepped toward the helicopter, Jack stopped and glanced toward the tree line. In the distance, sunlight was breaking through the clouds, glinting off the frozen creek. For the first time since he'd come to Pine Hollow, it didn't look haunted. He turned to Elena. You were right about one thing. What's that? She asked over the wind. Mason Hale wasn't waiting for me. He was waiting for someone brave enough to listen. He nodded towards the dog in his arms. And this guy, he never stopped listening. As they lifted off, the camera crews below captured the moment. The burned cabin shrinking beneath them, the snow-covered valley stretching out like a page turned clean. Elena glanced over, voice barely audible above the rotors. What now, Jack? He looked down at Rex, then out the window. Now? We make sure they never forget who really found the truth. Rex gave a faint, tired bark as the helicopter rose higher into the grey sky, the sound small, defiant, and alive. And somewhere below, beneath the snow and soot, the earth that had swallowed secrets for half a century finally lay quiet. The truth was no longer buried. It was breathing again. Spring came slow to Pine Hollow, the kind of spring that crept in quietly, shy after the violence of winter. The Snow melted in thin veins that trickled down the slope, carrying with it the soot of the cabin fire and the memory of what had burned there. Jack rebuilt it, board by board, over the course of 3 weeks. Not the same as before, smaller, simpler, stripped of anything that wasn't necessary. He left the stone hearth untouched, though. Its surface was still blackened from the fire, the cracks filled with ash. He said it was better that way. "Some scars should stay," he told the carpenter, who offered to replace it. The new cabin smelled of pine and wet soil. It was quieter, too. No strange creaks, no phantom knocks beneath the floor. Just the sound of wind through the pines and the soft rhythm of Rex's paws on the porch. Rex had healed, though the fur around his ribs grew in white where the bullet had grazed him. He walked a little slower now, but there was pride in the way he carried himself, like a soldier who'd seen too much, but still stood guard. Most mornings, Jack found him lying in front of the cabin steps, head raised, eyes fixed on the tree line. Sometimes Jack would follow his gaze, expecting to see something move out there, a shadow maybe, or the ghost of what once was. But there was nothing, only the forest breathing again. Inside, on the wooden table near the window, stood a single framed photograph. Mason Hale, smiling in his work uniform, standing before the Silver Hollow mine. Next to it, a second photo. One Elena had taken the day the story broke. Jack and Rex in front of the charred ruins, the snow still falling around them, both of them looking toward something the camera couldn't see. Above the photos, nailed to the wall, hung the headline from Elena's article printed in the Pine Hollow Gazette, "The Dog That Guarded the Truth." Jack didn't like attention, but Elena insisted the world needed to know who really uncovered the story. The article spread farther than either of them expected. It made its way to national news, documentaries, even classrooms. For a few months, Pine Hollow became a name people said with a mix of shame and respect. She'd written, "While officials buried evidence for half a century, one man and his dog unearthed the truth. It was not technology or force that did it, but instinct, a creature's refusal to look away." Jack didn't read the comments or the interviews. He didn't like reporters. He liked the quiet. He spent his days repairing the fence, helping locals rebuild wells with government aid that finally arrived, and taking long walks along the creek where the poisoned water had once run dark. Now it flowed clear again. Fish had returned, small flashes of silver beneath the surface. Sometimes he'd stop there and sit on the bank while Rex waded in up to his knees, snapping playfully at the current. "Guess you earned it," Jack would say. Elena visited once in April. She brought coffee, new bandages for Rex's side, and a book about environmental justice with his name in the acknowledgments. "You know," she said, standing by the porch rail, "people are calling you a hero." Jack smiled faintly. "That's funny. The hero still chases squirrels in his sleep." She laughed. "Then maybe that's what we need more of. Heroes who don't know they are." When she left, she placed an envelope on his table. Inside was a check. The portion of her book advance she said she couldn't keep. Jack never cashed it. Instead, he pinned it beneath the headline clipping. By May, the hills were green again. Grass pushed through the old burn marks around the foundation. Jack planted a small garden out back, potatoes, onions, carrots. The kind of garden a man grows not to survive, but to stay grounded. Every now and then strangers would come by, families who'd lost someone to the mine's poison, children of workers who'd fallen sick. They'd stand by the edge of the clearing, not daring to come closer until Jack waved them in. They'd thank him. Some brought flowers, others brought old photos, hoping he'd recognize faces from Hale's time. Jack never had the right words. He just nodded and listened. Sometimes Rex would nudge their hands, sensing the weight they carried. More than once, that simple touch made someone cry. By evening, the valley always went quiet again. The world slowed. Jack would sit on the porch steps, the air heavy with the smell of rain and pine sap. He'd watch the light fade over the ridge, that same ridge where headlights had once burned through the storm. Rex would rest his head on Jack's boot, eyes half closed, chest rising and falling in rhythm with the wind. "You did good, buddy," Jack would say, his voice soft. "You kept your promise." A breeze rustled the trees, carrying the faint sound of water from the creek. For a moment it almost sounded like a whisper, like the echo of Mason Hale's words from that letter. "If anyone finds this, please, don't let them stay silent." Jack looked toward the horizon, the last streaks of gold sinking behind the mountains. He whispered back, "We didn't." Inside, the lantern flickered against the photo frames, casting long shadows across the wall, the dog, the man, and the truth they refused to bury. And outside, under a sky washed clean by rain, Rex lifted his head one last time to the forest, listening. Not guarding out of fear anymore, but out of faith in what they had saved, and in what was finally free. A year passed, and Pine Hollow changed. What used to be a forgotten mining town buried under half a century of silence had become something else, a place people now came to remember. Not the tragedy itself, but the courage that pulled truth out of the dark. The air was warm that morning, thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. A yellow school bus wound up the gravel road that led to the Silver Hollow Truth Site, its tires crunching over the stones that once marked the mine's boundary. Inside the bus, children pressed their faces against the glass as the rebuilt cabin came into view. It stood where the old one had burned, smaller, humbler, but stronger. Behind it, the forest stretched endlessly towards the horizon. At the center of the clearing stood a bronze statue, a German shepherd, head lifted, eyes set towards the ridge. Beneath the statue, a plaque read, "Rex, the dog who guarded the truth." A teacher led the class out of the bus. The kids scattered around, their voices rising in wonder and curiosity. Cameras clicked, jackets rustled, and the sound of small feet moved over the gravel paths that curved between memorial stones engraved with names, workers, families, children who had once lived in the poisoned valley. Near the cabin porch, a man sat quietly on a wooden chair. His beard had turned grey, his shoulders heavier, but his eyes still held that steady calm. Jack Monroe. He watched the children run, their laughter echoing where gunfire and sirens had once filled the air. He smiled faintly, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. A small boy, maybe 9 or 10, broke away from the group and walked up to him. The boy stopped beside the bronze dog, tilting his head as he read the plaque aloud. "Is that the dog from the story?" he asked, his voice soft but curious. Jack looked at the statue, then at the forest beyond it. He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "That's him." "What was he guarding?" the boy asked. Jack's gaze lingered on the plaque, then drifted upward to the trees. "He didn't bark for food," he said finally. "He barked for the truth." The boy thought about it, frowning slightly, as if trying to understand something that didn't quite fit into a classroom lesson. Then he smiled. "That's a good dog." Jack chuckled. "The best I ever knew." A light breeze swept through the clearing, carrying the faint scent of pine needles and the distant sound of the creek. The forest whispered, not hauntingly anymore, but peacefully, like it had finally forgiven itself. The teacher called the group to gather near the statue for a photo. Jack stayed seated, watching as they arranged themselves around Rex's likeness. The sun broke through the trees just then, a beam of gold falling perfectly on the bronze fur. Someone snapped the picture. The flash caught in the metal eyes, and for a brief second it almost looked like the statue was alive. After the crowd dispersed, Elena Cross walked up the hill. She was older too, now wearing the kind of calm confidence that came with finishing something you once thought impossible. "You kept it just the way it was," she said, nodding toward the cabin. Jack smiled. "Didn't see much reason to change it. Truth doesn't need polish. It just needs a place to rest." Elena's eyes softened. "You know, that story's still making rounds. Schools use it when they talk about integrity. Journalism, loyalty?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Journalism, huh? Thought they'd teach the dog's version instead." She laughed. "Maybe they should. It'd probably be more honest." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking toward the statue. A few birds darted across the clearing, their wings flashing white in the sunlight. "He ever come back?" Elena asked quietly. Jack's smile faded into something softer. "Sometimes I think I hear him. Early in the morning, before the wind picks up. That low rumble he used to make when he was guarding the porch." He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. "Some things don't stop just because they're gone." Elena nodded, understanding more than words could say. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did right by him, Jack." He didn't answer. He just looked out toward the forest. That same forest where it all began, where a soldier and his dog stumbled into a secret buried beneath the snow. The camera crew filming the documentary panned slowly across the scene. The rebuilt cabin, the children, the statue gleaming under sunlight. Jack's voice carried over the final shot. "He didn't bark for food, he barked for the truth." The camera tilted upward, capturing the trees swaying in the wind, then the wooden sign at the entrance of the clearing. It read, burned carefully into the grain. "He didn't bark for food, he barked for the truth." The frame faded to black, and a line appeared on screen. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" Then the music rose, slow, steady, and filled with warmth. A narrator's voice closed the film. In a world that forgets too easily, sometimes it takes a loyal heart to remind us what matters most. If this story touched you, share it, and honor the dogs who still guard the truth for us all. As the final shot lingered on the bronze shepherd watching over the valley, the words appeared once more, simple and timeless. Dedicated to all who listen when no one else will. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel for more true stories of loyalty, courage, and the bond that never fades.